trained Jewish doctors working beyond the frontiers of accepted medicine.
They were obviously very, very close. The fact that they lived in different cities, Vienna and Berlin, allowed them to correspond and at the same time, almost paradoxically, prevented them getting too close, or one might better say, seeing too much of the truth about one another.
For years, the two men corresponded regularly, exchanging ideas, thoughts, and findings. But their relationship also turned sour. In 1903, the two men met for the last time.
Fliess by then had every good reason to suspect Freud's ingenuousness, to fear that Freud was intent on plagiarizing him, or more bluntly, stealing from Fliess a theory of bisexuality, which by then Fliess had been working on for nearly 4 years. And Fliess declined the invitation to go on this hiking exhibition, convinced that Freud had a plan to lure him to his death.
Freud confessed,
"An intimate friend and hated enemy have always been necessary requirements of my emotional life."
Loss and loneliness seemed to play a large part in the life of Sigmund Freud. He was mourning his father, who died in 1896, while he was writing The Interpretation of Dreams.
This book has a subjective significance for me personally, a significance which I only grasped after I had completed it. It was, I found, a portion of my own self-analysis, my reaction to my father's death. That is to say, to the most important event, the most poignant loss of a man's life.
Many of the dreams and the interpretation of dreams that he discusses, and many of the themes that he discusses, are dreams and themes about how do you live with loss? How do you make sense of the past when elements of the past are going to disappear from your life, and how do you retain them in some form that's meaningful?
Mothers and fathers play a huge role in Freudian analysis. Although he changed his mind a number of times about specifics, Freud was certain that boys' and girls' relationships to their parents were crucial to development, sexually and psychically. He believed the full emancipation of women would mean the end of an ideal. After all, he concluded, nature has destined women, through beauty, charm, and sweetness, for something else.
There's a lot of emphasis been put on Freud's diminishing women by talking about penis envy. Freud was wrong about women in a number of ways, and in one aspect of his being wrong was that he saw mothers as entirely benign. Otto Rank said that essentially that Freud knew no mother other than the good mother. He was afraid to say anything critical because of his own anxieties around his own mother, and that whenever he approached that subject, he veered off.
Modern psychoanalysts believe that little girls develop a sense of femininity very early in childhood. If a woman feels persistent inferiority to men, development has gone profoundly wrong.
Freud himself was dissatisfied with his theory of female sexuality, and analysts ever since his time have critiqued it and revised it. In part, Freud has been misinterpreted. For example, when he talked about penis envy and feelings of inferiority in women, he wasn't saying that women should feel that way. He was saying that they often did.
Before Freud, most people believed in conscious will alone. Freud forced us to recognize the unknown power of our unconscious. Like most revolutionaries, he has been both damned and praised.
Freud's self-image was one of the conquistador, that here is this warrior against repressive forces who would set us all free and would allow us to fulfill the human potential, even though he had some doubts whether we could really do that. He's never in any doubt that one day he's going to arrive.
This is the Sigmund Freud who, in 1896, with his seduction theory, proclaimed to his medical colleagues that he had discovered no less than the source of the Nile of neuropathology. That's a quote. This is the same Sigmund Freud who, a decade later, or thereabouts, would claim to have deciphered the, quote, riddle of the Sphinx in terms of his theory of infantile sexuality. This is quite a conceit.
By 1897, Freud considered his seduction theory, the assumption that all neuroses are caused by childhood sexual abuse, invalid. He concluded that many patients who cited abuse had no more than active imaginations, or that Freud himself had encouraged false confessions. Recently, there have been a wave of accusations of sexual abuse from people who suddenly remember what they allegedly repressed years ago. Although Freud withdrew his seduction theory and would have regarded most of these charges with skepticism, his theory of repression and the unconscious is being used, most Freudians would say misused, to assert their authenticity.
Among certain feminist circles, it's held that he changed his mind about what was called the seduction theory, i.e. that many of his patients actually had been sexually abused, because of concerns about his career and his reputation, that it was a piece of intellectual dishonesty on his part. This reading simply isn't true. Freud's discovery of infantile sexual fantasies was one of his most important discoveries, and he was very clear about this. And at the same time, he was convinced that a certain small number of children had been sexually abused, and he never gave up the idea that certain neuroses were caused by that.
The study of Freud is sometimes considered more of a religion than a science, and yet when measured against scientific findings, at least some of Freud's theories hold true. Everybody dreams, probably. Although many of us forget them, during a normal night's sleep we dream for about 1/5 of the time. Our most vivid dreams come to us during REM, rapid eye movement sleep. They can be as intense and emotional as real-life experiences. At the Bethesda Sleep Disorder Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, experiments on dreams and sleep are conducted almost daily.
He's had a scene change. You know, like he's gone from one room to another, or the whole theme and place of the dream has changed. I think
patients are attached to electrodes which measure various impulses, including REM. EEG readings, which record the electrical activity of the brain, show that these periods of rapid eye movement correspond with particular brain rhythms.
The notion that REM sleep, the physiology, has somehow destroyed, altered, or made Freud untenable, I think we too quickly, my colleagues, even my psychoanalytic colleagues, jump much too quickly to the notion that Freudian theory is somehow put aside by the laboratory work.
Freud theorized that dream function helps keep us asleep. REM theory supports this idea. The more REM we have, the more we dream. Since the most REM happens in the second half of the night when we're more likely to wake up, that is also when most dreams occur, which with their censoring, keep us asleep.
I dreamt I was high up in an apartment building watching a volcano erupt when suddenly I heard a terrible noise, and I looked out and saw a huge tidal wave coming. And at that moment I suddenly thought, my children, and I turned around and saw each of my 3 children being swept out of the building. The next moment I was in the water swimming after them, and I was trying to find them, and I was crying and crying in the water. Then I was on dry land looking for them, and I saw all these dead people lying around. And First I found my eldest daughter, and she was wet, but she was alive. Then my middle daughter, and I knew for sure my youngest daughter was dead. And sure enough, I saw her lying out among all these other people, and she was dead. And I was crying and crying, and I woke up.
The next giant of dream interpretation was Carl Jung. At first an ardent disciple of Freud. Although Jung and Freud did not formally part ways until 1913, they had conflicting opinions.